So it's the first half of a back-to-back against the San Jose Sharks, last season's worst team in the NHL, and while they are fairly significantly, I'd say, better this season than they were last season, at least the way that they play, maybe not their record so much, this is still very much one of the worst teams in the NHL. A good chance then for the Kraken to collect 4 points, and with this being the first half of a back-to-back, it does mean Grubauer gets the start, especially with Joey coming off probably his worst start of the season so far in the game previous against Anaheim. Now, as we know, the Kraken haven't necessarily been playing very well in front of Grubauer so far this season, but for once, or I suppose to be a little bit more literal, just the second time this season, they actually do play a pretty good game in front of him. Maybe not defensively, it still was not very clean defensively, a couple more defensive zone turnovers, and some questionable, to say the least, back-checking, but they at least put up points, which is something that he really has not seen almost at all so far this season from the crease. So all the Kraken need from Grubauer is for him to play like he's played so far this season, and it's an easy win. Heck, as long as he doesn't have the worst game of his Kraken career, they should come away with the victory. Of course, I probably wouldn't be saying that if it wasn't relevant. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where Grubauer does play the worst game in my mind in his Kraken career, and having watched an okay amount of him in Colorado, I didn't see that much of him when he played for the Capitals, so I don't know for sure, but it has to be up there with the worst games of his career, period. As the Kraken go on to lose 8-5 to the San Jose Sharks, on the 2-year anniversary of the only other time that they've given up 8 goals, though that one they won 9-8 against the Kings. And just to be clear, right out of the gate, because there are not going to be a whole lot of positives to take out of specifically how Grubauer played in this game, I don't want this to come off as bashing him unnecessarily or going in on Grubauer, although I know that there are portions of the fan base that are kind of done with him, especially with how incredible Decord has played so far this season. And I still do think that he is treated somewhat unfairly by a portion of the fan base, though I understand that there's frustration, it has to go somewhere, and, well, goaltenders like quarterbacks are the easy place to put that frustration when things are going well. But with this game, yeah, there's just no way around it. It was not his night, to put it plainly. And in fact, it was not his night in a way that no other night of his career potentially has ever been. So one last time before we dive into things, I still like Grubauer, especially as a person. He's a great human being, and nothing, not this game or any other way he plays on the ice, really affects that. And I still think he's given the Kraken a chance to win in just about every other start he's had so far this season. Unfortunately, in this game, he is absolutely the reason that they lost it. There are still some other players that could have played better in this game, certainly in the defensive end, but Grubauer is playing the one spot on the ice that can make or break a game, either win you the game or lose it, and in this case, he's definitely the reason that they lost. And unfortunately, with that being the case, the game gets off to about the start you would expect. As although it takes a couple minutes for it to happen, the first shot on goal, on either goal for that matter, goes into the Kraken net past Grubauer, and this one is not particularly well defended by the Kraken, so it is not all on Grubauer. In fact, I might even go so far as to say that it's not mostly on Grubauer. It's a pass from behind the net that comes out to a wide open guy for a one-timer from a dangerous spot for a guy to be getting a one-time shot off from a pass behind the net, and he puts it in past Grubauer to give the Sharks the 1-0 lead. So at least this first one would not have been an easy save for Grubauer to make by any stretch of the imagination. It would have been a pretty nice save, but I don't even know if he gets a piece of it. It goes in past him to the far side through what originally I thought was a screen. It looked like at live action that Grubauer just doesn't see the shot coming, but you can see pretty clearly that he is able to see the shot come off. It's just that he had, just been looking behind the net where the puck was. It gets out quickly. The shot comes off before he has too much chance to react. It doesn't hit him. Yeah, the Sharks get that early lead. So the game's already not off to a very good start, especially considering 1 goal against would have been enough for the Kraken to lose 3 of Grubauer's starts already so far this season. But that wouldn't be the case in this one, as the Kraken answer right back under a minute later there into the offensive end. It's that same line that produced in both the games against the Ducks that's doing it here for the Kraken once again. It's Wright getting the puck in, and then also keeping the puck in along the boards a little bit later. He gets it out to Tolvanen. Tolvanen finds Bjorkstrand wide open in the slot with nobody between he and Vanacek. Another goaltender that the Kraken had from day one, although they traded him right back to DC before ever playing with the Kraken, but he was taken in the expansion draft. So actually, 3 goaltenders in this game were with the Kraken before they ever played a game. But regardless of that fun fact, I suppose, Bjorkstrand beats Vanacek to the far side to give the Kraken right back the goal and tie things up. And from there, still early on in the first, the Kraken seize and maintain the momentum in this game throughout the vast majority of the remainder of the first period, really only slowing down when they were on the power play, which they were twice in the middle of the first period. Neither one goes absolutely anywhere. They at least don't give up a shorthanded chance, so that's still kind of an improvement over the last 7 games for the Kraken, but you need to get something going there on the power play. And then eventually the Sharks get a power play, and while they don't score on it late in the first, right as it comes to an end before the 5th skater can even get out on the ice into the play, they do end up scoring. Now, with this one, even aside from the Kraken still effectively being a man down when it happens, Grubauer does make the initial save on the first shot, which is another wide open shot from below the top of the face-off circle on the same side of the ice. He makes that save, but it still rebounds out to the far side, which maybe you'd like a little bit more rebound control, though I feel like that's being a bit nitpicky. Really, the reason this one ends up in the back of the net is that specifically Riker Evans just doesn't really stay in his spot. He gets caught a little bit too high up in the slot trying to take away a shooting or passing lane. And the Kraken in general defensively just completely lose and forget about Klim Kostin, who circles around behind the net and then is all alone next to it to pick up that rebound and put it in past Grubauer without really anything he can do about it. Thankfully, though, for a second time, the Kraken just will not go away at the other end of the ice, as right off the faceoff, they get into the offensive end, force a faceoff in the offensive end, and then from there, Chandler Stevenson just takes the puck with him through a whole host of San Jose Sharks, poking and prodding at it through their feet, eventually getting it all by himself in front of the net, makes one move and just slides it through the 5-hole of Vanacek into the net to give the Kraken right back a tie game, taking the goal back that they had just given up. Stevenson picks up his second of the season and ties the game right back up less than a minute again after the Sharks score. And then just a little bit later, the Kraken get their third power play of the first period, but, well, for one thing, because this power play comes with just over a minute left in the period, which means it's going to be split by the intermission, and power plays, regardless of what team is on them that are split by intermission, are significantly less likely to score than ones that aren't. Not to mention that the Kraken are coming into this power play 0 for 22 in their last 22 attempts on the power play over their last 7 games, and just failed to score on 8 attempts against one of the worst penalty kills in the NHL in the Ducks, including a 6-on-4 opportunity with a double minor at the end of the last game. I think it's safe to say that nobody was expecting anything out of this Kraken power play. So go figure that this is the one that they break that streak on and score. It comes with less than a minute left in the period. Bjorkstrand fires off a shot that I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he was trying to miss the net. Either way, it barely misses the net on one side, rebounds off the end boards, goes out to the other side where Shane Wright is all alone and has a completely empty net to shoot at. He doesn't miss, gets his first career power play goal, and gives the Kraken the late 3-2 lead in the first period and their first power play goal in quite some time. So it certainly wasn't a pretty period for the Kraken, but somehow, someway, they find their way into the first intermission with a lead that, as we start the second, does not last very long, as this is where things start to get ugly for Grubauer. Just a couple minutes into the second period, that lead evaporates as the Sharks come into the offensive end with a one-on-one rush, if you want to call it that. It's still pretty well defended with a guy in Will Smith's face as he skates in and fires off a shot from well out, just looking for, I guess, a rebound, or probably, if anything, just to get the puck in deep, maybe get Grubauer to freeze it and you get a face-off in the offensive end. But none of that ends up happening, as this shot that has absolutely no business ending up in the net sneaks through Grubauer's 5-hole. He gets a piece of it, but not nearly enough to keep it from getting across the goal line, and the Sharks tie things up. Yeah, again with this one, I mean, I'm rooting for the guy, we all are, but I think he'd be the first one to tell you that this is just a goal that cannot go in under any circumstances. Once again, though, less than a minute after another Sharks goal, the Kraken are given a golden opportunity to answer right back, this time in the form of a 4-minute double minor for high sticking, as Cartier gets his lip cut from a high stick. And although it takes the Kraken 3 minutes to just get set up in the offensive end in that 4-minute power play, once they do, they once again find the back of the net. Evans gets it down to Stevenson. Stevenson is given a golden road to pass right to the other side for Shane Wright. He happily takes the opportunity, getting the cross seam pass cleanly across to Wright. Wright with the one-timer. Vanacek makes a valiant effort of getting across to make the toe save and gets a piece of it, but it still finds the net. to give Wright his second power play goal of the game. Heck, the Kraken themselves their second power play goal of the game, which seems absolutely ridiculous considering how things have been going. And it also gives the Kraken back the 4-3 lead. This time, though, it would be the Sharks' turn to respond quickly, as just over a minute after the Kraken take the lead back on the power play, the Sharks get down the ice, and on a bit of a broken rush, it's a flubbed pass that ends up sliding back to the top of the blue line in the defensive zone for the Kraken. A one-time shot that I can only assume Grubauer wasn't able to see come off cleanly through a couple of Kraken players between he and where the shot was taken, though it still kind of seems like there was a lane there, and either way, it's a shot from well out that while it is an absolute laser and a nice shot, it's still a save that you'd like to see your goaltender make. I mean, I suppose given how nice of a shot it was, even from that distance, it's not a terrible goal to let in for Grubauer. In isolation, you might not think too much of it. It's still a savable one, but not an easy save necessarily. Considering the body of work in this game, though, it definitely adds to the sum total, and it's certainly one that is savable even if it's not easy. And even more unfortunately for the Kraken, for the first time in this game, there's no real response from them after this Sharks goal goes in, and a couple minutes later, that means the Sharks have an opportunity to take the lead for the third time in the game, which is exactly what they do. They get the puck down the ice on a bit of a rush chance that's, well, a good portion for the reason for this goal. A good portion of the reason this goal ends up happening is that there's not a very good back check specifically from the forward group of the Kraken. On this one, both defenders get in pretty well. Alexiak and Montour are both present, but the forward's just too slow to get back. It eventually allows some open space for a net side shot, which is on a tight angle, and this is one where I do think Grubauer is, for whatever reason, really low and just leaving way too much of the top of the net available, which is exactly where the puck goes over his glove hand into the near top corner to give the Sharks that 5-4 lead. So again, certainly not one that I'm putting fully on Grubauer considering the defensive play from the team in front of him here, but another one that he has a significant role in playing in how this ends up in the net. Now, to me anyway, this is the point in the game where, if it wasn't for this being the first half of a back-to-back, this is probably where you make the change in net, if not after the previous goal that Grubauer let in, though this one I think maybe even fits a little bit better because it also helps send a little bit of a message that the way the team is playing defensively is just not good enough, on top of maybe making that change in net for a guy that's clearly not seeing the puck very well. But with it being the first half of a back-to-back, and especially with Decord seeming like he could use some rest after how that last game against the Ducks went, you kind of just have to leave Grubauer in there and try to get him to work things out. But I think there's still an argument to be made that when a minute later, another goal ends up past Grubauer on another one that he really probably should have had, yeah, maybe you still make the change at that point. Once again, less than a minute later, the Sharks come rushing into the offensive end once again, poorly defended by the Kraken, specifically with the back-checking of the forward group here. Both Kraken defenders have the play in front of them, so it's not like it's an odd man rush, and at least they are kind of where they're supposed to be. Maybe you'd like them a little bit closer to the Sharks players coming in, though without any support coming behind those players, they kind of have to play a little bit more conservative. And in the end, well, it's a pass that does get across to Celebrini for a wide open shot in the slot because of that poor back-checking from the Kraken forward group. Again, it's another one to me that at the very least Grubauer could have. He has a very good chance at making this save if he plays it right. And maybe you could make the argument that he should have it, though it is a wide open shot from a dangerous area from a very dangerous young player in the NHL, showing every bit of that first overall pick that he was in this last draft. But even with all that being true, and even with this coming pretty soon after a pass from the side, so Grubauer does have to move in his crease to make the save. And feel free if you think I'm nitpicking a little bit too much here on how Grubauer plays this one. But to me, he has the time to get farther across to set himself up better to save this one and at least take away the near side shot. He just doesn't push far enough across the crease, leaving that near side over the blocker for Celebrini to shoot at. He puts it right there over the blocker and gives the Sharks the 2-goal lead. The first 2-goal lead for any team in this game that had been going back and forth all night long. Well, not night, it was a day game, but anyway. And either way, certainly at this point, if it wasn't for this being the first half of a back-to-back, a change would have been made in net. Though even with that said, I think at this point you have to seriously consider making the change anyway. Hackstall, at least on one occasion, made a change in net on the first half of a back-to-back, and I think the Kraken even won both games at one point when that happened, though I can't remember specifically if that was last year or 2 years ago. Probably 2 years ago, considering how that went. Regardless, the option is there, and especially with this being, even with travel between the two games, and that maybe does play a factor, with this game, the first half coming in the middle of the day, so you have a whole half day extra that separates the two games. I don't know, to me that gives you at least a little bit more wiggle room to make that change and try to salvage this game, especially considering even if with you being 2 goals down midway through the second, it's not like the Sharks haven't been handing out scoring opportunities like candy at the other end of the ice. You probably will have a chance to come back in this game as long as you don't give up another goal. And sure enough, in the last 2 minutes of the second period, the Kraken make that push to start the comeback, just like they did at the end of the first to take the lead, though that was with the help of a power play. And I know the Kraken power play being a help is some words that we're not used to. Either way, these are 2 of the best shifts for the Kraken, certainly in this game, if not 2 of the best shifts of the season, as the Beniers line, towards the end of a shift for one of the Sharks' lines, pushes them down into their end of the ice and then hems them in. By the end of it, they were on, I think, a couple of them a 3-minute shift, so some very tired legs out there. Meanwhile, while the Beniers line isn't able to score, they do keep them in the offensive end long enough to get the Gord line fully out onto the ice, and the Sharks do clear it once to at least get a partial change, but the Kraken are back in with that Gord line fast enough that I don't think they get the full change off, and either way, it doesn't matter what Sharks players are out there, as this Gord line would not take no for an answer. They would not quit on the play. Both Tanev and Cartier put shots off the post that beat Vanacek. Eventually, though, another hard checking play to fight a puck away from a Shark is won by, I want to say, Tanev or Cartier. Either way, Tanev ends up with it, gets it out to the slot for a shot from Riker Evans. Evans gets that shot off. While Vanacek does get a piece of it, it bounces out into the open crease, where Gord is able to hack and whack at it, and the second chance puts it into the empty net to give the Kraken the 5th goal of the game and bring them back to within 1. So the Kraken get that massively important goal to go into the third down just 1, which is a much more doable feat, even against a Sharks team that probably could have given up a 2-goal comeback in the third. And they get it off of, I would say, the most tenacious single shift of the season so far for the Kraken. Just incredible work there, obviously set up by the Beniers line that makes a little bit of this extra fight and ability to consistently win the pucks for the Gord line possible. But then, yeah, just an unmatched fight from that Gord line to overcome a couple of bad luck bounces off of posts that wouldn't go into the net to still find a way to get it through a crowd of Sharks and force it into that net. And with that being the case, with the Kraken now going into the third down just that 1 goal, it's still a situation where you can ill afford to give up another one, even against a team like the Sharks that's more than capable of giving up a 2-goal lead in the third to lose. It certainly makes it a lot harder, and even at that, the goaltending that you're getting from Grubauer in this game, you can hardly rely on giving up just 1. And we can go back and forth on whether or not it's just this 1 game for Grubauer, but either way, you can clearly tell that he's just not seeing the puck very well in this specific game on this specific day. If you want to give yourself the best chance to win in a game that, let's be honest, is maybe not a must-win still this early on in the season, though you're a quarter of the way through, it's definitely a game against an opponent that you have to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, give yourself the best chance to win, and making the change in net and going with the Gord into the third here, if it's at all an option, has to be the one that you go with to try to make that win happen and make this comeback possible. Now, of course, with that said, well, to me, the fairly clear best decision seems to be to go with Decord in the third here, and this probably goes without saying to some degree, but obviously the coaching staff and the team have a better idea of where Decord is at coming out of that game against Anaheim and where they want him to be at going into the second half of this back-to-back. And again, it's not like the team, even with Grubauer not at his best, is incapable of still winning this game in the third period. After all, they outscored the Sharks in the first with the same Grubauer in net. And I suppose in the end, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, since the Kraken don't end up scoring in the third. And it's not like Decord in net was going to score them that 6th goal to tie things back up, much less try to win it with a 7th one. But even with that being said, it certainly doesn't help anything. Certainly doesn't help the narrative of the game around Grubauer when halfway through the third period, he lets in another completely inexcusable, incredibly soft goal that he just absolutely has to make a save on without any question. It's another shot from well out, even farther out than the goal from Smith that started out the scoring in the second. And once again, there's a Kraken player right in front of the shot challenging it all the way. It's out to the side of the offensive end. It's so far out, in fact, that The net's not even in picture on the replay when the shot is taken, but nonetheless, it goes off the top of Grubauer's glove as he whiffs on it, trying to catch it too early, into the back of the net behind him to give San Jose back the 2-goal lead, making it 7-5. The Kraken really don't have a particularly good third period offensively, certainly not with any kind of a push like they had in the first or second period. It's kind of back and forth the rest of the way. They just aren't able to get a clean transition like we've seen them do throughout this game and a lot of the season. Eventually, they go empty net pretty early on, actually. There's still over 5 minutes left in the game, I think, when they go empty net. I suppose maybe that was the message of, yeah, our goaltender's not giving us much of a chance, and we want to give our other guy a chance to get a full rest before the second half of the back-to-backs, so we'll just go empty net with a couple more minutes than maybe we usually would have. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay off for the Kraken as the Sharks hit the empty net from below their own goal line down in the corner in their end to make it 8-5, and that would turn out to be the final score. So once again, there's no way around it that from a team perspective, this is another fairly inexcusable loss for the Kraken. Now, the scapegoat obviously is the performance of Grubauer in this game, though it's not like the team played well enough defensively, whether that was in transition or in their own end of the ice, to really help him out, at least on a couple of those goals. Still, the two inexcusable ones that he lets in, and then you take out the empty netter, is the difference in the game. As for where that then puts the team right now, it does kind of make this next game here on Saturday a pretty much must-win for the Kraken. You can't afford to lose back-to-back games to the Sharks. Even with them playing better than they were last season, this is still a team that you really should have taken advantage of the 8 points you had on the schedule there. And they certainly, if they want to make the playoffs, need to get at least 6 of them, which starts with the game on Saturday. And even aside from what the future holds with those 2 games later in the season against the Sharks, the first at the end of January, the other towards the beginning of March, so it'll be a while before the Kraken see this team again. Even as things stand right now, the Kraken need this second half of the back-to-back win, and honestly kind of need to do it in fairly decisive fashion to get things turned around after how these last 2 games have gone, with maybe the worst one still being the one against the Ducks that led into this one. Now you're at a point where this is a 4-game stretch, the 2 against the Ducks and the 2 against the Sharks, where you really wanted to win all 4 of those and kind of needed to win 3 to make sure you're staying in the playoff race. And there's still a lot of season left. But like I said, these are games against teams that you should be able to beat, that you need to take advantage of if you want to make that push into the postseason, especially considering you're in this huge chunk of teams in the Western Conference hovering around that 500 mark. And now you're already at a point with this 4-game stretch where, let's call it like it is, it's been a failure. Even if you win this next game against the Sharks in the second half of a back-to-back, this is a 4-game stretch where you really should have come out with at least 6 points and could have come out with 8. Instead, if you win that game, you get 4. Basically, at this point, you're trying to take a failure of a 4-game stretch and prevent it from becoming a disaster, and also prevent throwing away 4 points on the schedule. And yes, I'm well aware that just over a quarter of the way through the season, these are not must-win games in the mathematical sense, that there's still plenty of season left for the Kraken to turn things around and make stuff happen, but that's the same song and dance that we did throughout the inaugural season and through large chunks of last year. And while they did last year get things turned around in late December, early January with that winning streak, well, again, it still kind of pointed to the fact that with the way things started out early on in the season, it wasn't a team that could be counted on to consistently perform enough to push all the way into a playoff spot. And even at that, if you do lose the second half of the back-to-back against the Sharks, losing both of those games and 3 of 4 against the Ducks and Sharks, it's then forcing you to have a good chance at even making that push to turn things around, to then have a good East Coast road trip against some pretty good teams with Carolina, the Rangers. I mean, the Islanders aren't necessarily pushovers, even though the Kraken have already beaten them once this season. The Devils are playing pretty well. It's going to be a tough road trip coming up, and the Kraken then would put themselves in a spot where they need to come out of it having a pretty similar run to what they had in the previous homestand where they went 5-1. And then there's the discussion of what to do about Grubauer. Now, to me, realistically, the real answer here is that it's just one game, at least for now anyway. Yeah, it's a horrible game. I mean, like I've said a couple of times already, I think the worst game of his Kraken career and very possibly the worst game of his NHL career as a whole. But it still is just one game. And again, treating this game like the outlier that we hope it turns out to be, I do think that he's given you a chance to win in the vast majority of his starts so far this season, which is what you want from a backup. And yeah, it's not ideal to be paying a backup nearly $6 million a year, But at least the good news there is that Decord is more than making up for it by being well above a 1.2 million goaltender as your starter. So, at least for right now anyway, even for as incredibly frustrating and to some maybe even downright infuriating as this performance was from Grubauer, absolutely an unacceptable performance from him that straight up, I don't think there's any way to argue that it didn't lose the Kraken the game in this one against a team that we all wish they would have beat. As long as this turns out to be an outlier, I think the Kraken are still fine with the tandem they have, and not tandem, they're fine with Decord as the starter playing the way he is, and maybe even slightly below where he was at. I mean, he was making a case for a Vezina run with the run that he had through that homestand, and maybe even the late part of that previous road trip where the Kraken just weren't scoring goals. And for Grubauer, that, again, has kind of been the other side of it for him, is that the Kraken, other than this game and one other, just were not scoring goals for him. So regardless of how he played in net, it wasn't like the Kraken were going to win games either because they weren't giving themselves the chance. On the other hand, though, if this turns out not to be an outlier and starts to turn Grubauer's season in a bad direction, and when I say not an outlier, I'm not expecting this to become anywhere near the norm. It'll be an outlier in that, again, like I said, worst game of his Kraken career, maybe his career as a whole. So it's an outlier to some degree. But as long as he plays more like he had up to this point in the season, we're fine. If he goes back to, if this game affects his confidence in a way that maybe the start of that inaugural season did and kind of carried through poor performances the rest of the year, then I think you have to start thinking about whether or not you send Grubauer down to the AHL and maybe bring one of those guys up. Though even there, things have been kind of up and down with specifically the guy you probably would bring up in Stetska. I don't think Koko's really ready for that. And maybe even think about bringing in a free agent goaltender as a third guy on the roster. They do have the roster space. They're not carrying 23 players right now. And with Eberle going on LTIR, at least for as long as Dunn's out, they do have some cap space and wiggle room there. It was mentioned, I saw somewhere, that Martin Jones is available, so you could go back to the well, though I'm not necessarily certain that the whole fan base would be super excited to go back to previous goaltenders that gave okay performances. Well, at least in Jones' case, he, for whatever reason, got the opposite of Grubauer in goal support. He would always get tons of goal support, while Grubauer never really has gotten that much. Either way, you do have to start looking at options if this turns out to be the start of a, well, more consistent poor performances from Grubauer, even if they're not as bad as this one. But we can talk about that in more detail down the road if it does turn out to be a problem and something the Kraken need to address, which hopefully it never will be, and we can just leave it here. If anything, what this game probably does do is just 100% solidify that Decord is the starter, Grubauer is the backup. This is no longer even a 1A, 1B tandem. We are at a starter-backup situation. Yeah, the contracts aren't necessarily the way that you'd like them ordered-wise, as far as that's concerned, but they at least have a very good starter in Decord right now. So hopefully this is just a one-off for Grubauer, and it's mostly smooth sailing the rest of the season. Let me know what you think down in the comments, though. We can continue that discussion down there if you'd like. For now, I think we've kind of exhausted, especially with this being the first half of a back-to-back. Finally, we can close things out with the Kraken 3 stars, and in spite of it being a loss to a Sharks team that I really don't feel like the Kraken have any excuse of losing to, especially after the game they played against the Ducks, there were some very good performances in this game. The first star for me, I gotta go with Shane Wright. I'm gonna give him this first star if for no other reason than just getting the Kraken power play off the schneid. 2 power play goals in this game for the Shane Wright by himself, but the power play in general, just 2 goals in a game is something that we never would have expected coming into this game with how things have been going, breaking that, again, 0-for-22 streak, the Kraken having not scored on the power play in 7 games. They at least now have an idea of something they can do to score some goals, even if it's something that teams will figure out pretty quick if it's the only option that they have. And with the second star, I'm going to go with Chandler Stevenson, pretty much entirely because of his offensive contributions, a 3-point night, a goal, 2 assists, and that goal was almost entirely a single one-man effort through the entire Sharks team off of that face-off. Schwartz did touch it at one point in the battle for it as it was kind of loose in a bunch of guys' feet, but Stevenson is the one that pulls it out of there and then takes it by himself to the net front and makes a nice move to score, and also had the 2 assists. Now, there's an argument to be made that he didn't have the best game necessarily, because the defensive end, well, even without Daniel Sprong kind of being an anchor defensively on that line. That line still struggled defensively in this game for the Kraken, so something's got to get figured out there. It seems like once they're stuck into the defensive end, they have a really hard time getting out of it. So hopefully that can get turned around. And then with the third star, there's a couple of options here. I want to go with Oliver Bjorkstrand because he too had a pretty good multi-point game for the Kraken. But I feel like it would be an absolute crime to leave all three of the Gord line off of the 3 stars after the game they had. As a line, they are the first star of the game. That line had an incredible game in this one for the Kraken. They had over an expected goal in this game, and I think just over a 10th expected goal against, so they were an absolute force out there all game long. They did get a lot of offensive zone time, so they didn't play nearly as much in the defensive end as some of the other lines because they were often following up the Beniers line, which was doing a good job transitioning into the offensive end and getting things set up for the Gord line then to take over. But while they were in that offensive end, I mean, we talked about the shift they had to end the second period that got the Kraken back in it with that goal. In the end of the 3, I'll go with Yanni Gord since he is the one that gets the goal. He also did pretty well in the face-off circle in this game, or at least through the first 2 periods. I don't know how it ended at the end of it, but through the first 2 periods, he was doing pretty well in the face-off circle. And yeah, it's just, it couldn't leave all 3 of them off, even if they were more exceptional as a unit rather than any one individual performance. One of them has to make it here, so I'll go Gord with the 3rd star. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below, though, if you would even had stars after the Kraken lose to the Sharks. It seems like they're due for one horrible disappointment against this team every season, and it usually happens in San Jose. But all we can hope for now is that the Kraken play their first good second half of a back-to-back all season and come out with the win in Seattle on Saturday. Until then, though, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.